Yeah, I'm Laura Orcott. So I am an associate director for HSE recruitment and our parent company, Executive Network Group. Hopefully, a lot of you will know me. I've probably spoken to you a lot in the past, but in case you don't, I have been working in health and safety recruitment for the last 14 years, which have flown by terrifyingly quickly. So the day job was finding roles for health and safety professionals. Worked my way into the associate director role, and now my role is I get to do all this sort of fun stuff, which is come out, talk to people, engage, share knowledge that I've learned over the years doing recruitment in this sort of industry. So that's why I'm here talking to you today. As mentioned, there's plenty of time for questions towards the end. This will probably be about half an hour, so loads of time for you to ask me some questions. So please feel free to add anything that you come up with as we are going through. So, yeah, welcome to today's. We are talking about imposter syndrome. So really, really big topic. I'm guessing most people that have joined us today probably have felt imposter syndrome at some point, which is potentially why you've signed up. But what I thought I would do is just start off with a bit of an overview of what is imposter syndrome? What is this thing? We're talking about it all the time. You see loads of people talking about it on social media and in blogs and all that sort of thing. But genuinely, what is it? So I found this really, really interesting when I looked into this. I always try and give you some background, some research, some stuff that you can go away and read yourselves afterwards. And when I was researching imposter syndrome, I found that it basically is a term that was coined by two doctors, Dr. Clance and Dr. Imes, back in the 1970s. They wrote a whole research paper on this syndrome, imposter syndrome. And basically the reason they did this is Dr. Clance, she had always experienced these kind of feelings of being an imposter, of not being quite right when she was in grad school. She described the fact that she always kind of thought she'd failed exams when she'd gone into exams, that she wasn't maybe as talented as her peers, or maybe she wasn't as hardworking as her peers, or maybe she wasn't as educated as them, or she didn't deserve to be there. She'd had these sorts of feelings quite a lot through grad school. And then later on in her career, when she herself then started teaching, she found that a number of her students were coming to her with really, really similar feelings. And they were coming to her and saying, I don't feel like I belong. I don't feel like maybe I'm meant to be here, like it's a mistake, and all of these things that she had herself felt when she was in grad school. So she was talking to a colleague, Dr. Imes, who had also felt these sorts of things, and they started doing some research into it, and then they wrote a paper which is linked here. So I believe you should have the slides after the session, so you can go away and have a read of this. But it's a research paper all around imposter syndrome, particularly in high achieving women and minorities. So that was kind of the focus for them when they wrote this research paper. So that's where the term came from, which I always thought was quite interesting. For something, that came from this research paper to be now so colloquially used, it's really, really in our everyday language, isn't it? We talk about it quite a lot. So I absolutely urge you to go and read that paper. It's really, really interesting. But another thing that actually Dr. Clance came up with as well is something called the Clance IP scale. And if you're like me and you like to torture yourself a little bit, this is something you might find quite interesting. So Dr. Clance created this test. Here's a little snippet of it here for you, where you can go through and you can answer all these questions. It's about 2 pages, only takes, 4 or 5 minutes, something like that. And it will give you then a result as to whether this is something that you are genuinely struggling with. So you can get results that range from, you only have a few thoughts of imposter syndrome. It's not, it's not that bad, up all the way to frequent, and then intense is the very, very top level. So I thought I would test this before I spoke about this today. So I went away, did this test myself. And I wasn't very surprised to find that mine came back as frequent feelings of imposter, something I probably could have guessed. It's quite validating, though, I think, when you do this test to say, okay, like this isn't truth, what I'm thinking. These are feelings that are from something else. And they are something that I struggle with quite a lot. So I think, that I found quite reassuring that these thoughts are indeed imposter syndrome for me and not truth. So definitely something you can go and have a little look at afterwards. But in a nutshell, imposter syndrome is basically where you potentially think that people have an exaggerated view of your abilities. So it may be that, everyone thinks you're a fantastic health and safety professional, but you think you've just kind of tricked them. You're okay, but you're not as good as they all say you are. As a result, you often get this fear of being exposed as a fraud. That you're going to talk to people and they're going to go, you don't really know what you're talking about. That's not true. And that's quite a powerful feeling. It's very anxiety inducing. And being completely honest, it's something I definitely feel quite a lot in this industry. I really, really struggle with it. Even though I've been working in health and safety recruitment for 14 years, I know that I do know my stuff. I know what I'm talking about. Every time I go to an event, say, and I'm talking to people in person, I have that little fear before I walk in the room of, oh gosh, they're going to expose me as a fraud. They're going to say, you don't know what you're talking about, which has literally never happened in 14 years of working in this industry. It's categorically not true, but that's some of the feelings that come up with it. And also the tendency to downplay your achievements. And I think a lot of us will really, really feel this. It may be that someone tells you what a fantastic job you did. You say, oh, well, it wasn't all me. So-and-so did this and so-and-so did that. And you kind of downplay what you did. And you do that because you don't want to be exposed as a fraud. You don't want people to find out that maybe you're not as good as they think you are. So it can be quite debilitating, these sorts of things. Loads of symptoms that come along with this. So it can cause major anxiety and depression. Burnout is a very, very real side effect of imposter syndrome that we do see a lot in high pressure industries, where you've put so much pressure on yourself for so long to hit these incredibly high standards that really nobody can ever live up to in an attempt to show people that you are not a fraud and you actually know what you're doing, that you end up burning out and you can't do anything. People have to take time off work or they retire. It can be really, really debilitating, as we said. Exhaustion, task avoidance is a really, really big one. So, I've sometimes seen this with teams where they are so paralyzed by the fear that they aren't good enough that actually they then don't even attempt to do the thing that they need to do. We see this a lot in universities when people go to university and it's their first time sort of living away from home. They don't think they're good enough. They don't think they stack up to their peers. And rather than being able to deal with those feelings, what sometimes happens is we just avoid it entirely. So they just, well, I can't be found out as a fraud if I just don't do the work. is quite a common thought process for that. So task avoidance is a really, really big one. And also being really dismissive of positive feedback. So I think that's one, particularly as women, I've noticed we do this a lot. Like we said, because we've got that fear of being exposed, whenever anyone does give you that positive feedback and that validation, we kind of tamp it down and say, oh yeah, thank you very much, but there's always a but. So there's a lot that can really come out of being someone that suffers with imposter syndrome. Another thing I found really interesting when I was researching this is the fact that there are so many different studies on imposter syndrome since the Clance and Imes paper. And they all vary quite a lot in terms of numbers of people who suffer with imposter syndrome. And I think that's for a number of reasons, particularly because a lot of people don't want to admit that this is something that they struggle with. So the studies really, really vary. You can go and have a look. There's lots of different research out there. The one that is quoted most often is that 70% of people have experienced imposter syndrome at one time, which is quite interesting. But delving into the stats a little bit further, back in 2020, there was a systematic review of over 60 different studies that had been done on imposter syndrome. And what this review was doing was kind of evaluating the prevalence of imposter syndrome and trying to get some defined statistics. And what that came up with is that basically the prevalence rates vary anywhere from 56 to 82%. So it's a huge amount of people that have felt this. And that there was a particular prevalence of imposter syndrome in graduate students, in college students, nurses, medical staff, and other very, very high pressure industries. That tends to have the highest numbers, but the stats do vary quite a lot. Interestingly, it is more prevalent in women and various different ethnicities. It can be found in men, and absolutely it is something that men do struggle with, but there definitely is a gender prevalence here, which I thought was really, really interesting. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think women and minorities or LGBTQ or whoever it is, I think sometimes in the workplace, they really, really struggle with imposter syndrome for a couple of reasons. One being that sort of exposure to stereotypes. So often we know as women or whoever it is, we know how we are going to be perceived in a certain setting. So we're constantly battling that preconceived idea of who we are. And that can really, really undermine your self-belief. Also, sometimes there is exclusion from things. You may be excluded from networking opportunities. You may be excluded from board meetings. You may be excluded from even just that sort of cliques in the office environment. And that can have a really, really big impact on whether we feel that imposter syndrome at all. And something we absolutely have to work on from an ED&I perspective, making sure there is inclusion so that can kind of help battle this thing. There's the pressures that come along sometimes with something called code switching. So I don't know if many of you have heard of code switching, but code switching is where basically you react or you speak in a certain way with certain people, and then you maybe change the way that you speak with others. And again, I think that's something that women and some minority groups are definitely used to doing, speaking in different ways to certain people. Again, using my own personal example as a woman in industry, we know sometimes that if we speak quite directly and we're quite straight with people, that women are perceived as bossy. So I often make an effort to switch up the way that I talk when I'm talking to men or whoever it is in the office, so that I don't have that perception. And all of this stuff just ties into that undermining of your self-belief of who you are and whether you're good enough and whether you deserve to be there. And then there's obviously a very women-specific issue in this industry and many industries, which is maternity leave. Women take a large amount of time off, quite rightly, for maternity leave, but having that time out from the business can often leave us feeling like we've missed out, or like we maybe are inadequate, or we've not caught up with other people, or can add into that exclusion thing that we felt. So all issues that we absolutely kind of need to address from that diversity and inclusion piece. And then finally, imposter syndrome, it's actually not diagnosable on the DSM. So for those of you that don't know, the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So basically, it's a handbook that's used by health professionals worldwide to help them diagnose mental disorders. Now, imposter syndrome is not on there. So what that means is not that it's not a recognizable syndrome, because it absolutely is, but that there isn't really any recognizable treatment for it. There's no sort of defined path of what we do if someone is struggling with imposter syndrome. As we mentioned with the symptoms, sometimes imposter syndrome can add to other things such as burnout or anxiety or depression, and those things can then be treated, but it itself is not on the DSM. Now, just because there is no medical treatment for it, as it were, doesn't mean there are not ways to counter this and to make sure that we can help ourselves get through it is kind of the good news there. But just a bit of info, I suppose, on the backstory of what imposter syndrome is, some background research there. And if you want to talk to yourself like I did, you can go away and do the Clance IP scale and see whether Dr. Clance would have agreed that this is something that you are really, really struggling with. So, as I said, I've been doing recruitment into health and safety for 14 years, and I have come across so many people that have struggled with imposter syndrome. It's a huge, huge topic. Definitely, I have seen the anecdotal evidence of the prevalence in women, but it absolutely is something that loads of people in health and safety struggle with. And that got me to thinking as to why, why health and safety? Why is that an industry where people particularly struggle with this as a syndrome? And I think there's quite a few reasons for it. The first being, as we discussed, imposter syndrome is really, really prevalent in those high pressure careers. It's very, very prevalent in high performing people. And health and safety is absolutely a high pressure career that attracts high performing people. So that's not really, really surprised. That absolutely ties in with the research that Clance and Iams had done previously. But I think as well, health and safety is an industry where people genuinely care. We are very, very ethical. We're often very studious. We like to read, we like to research. We have very high standards for what we do. And all of that is absolutely tying into that imposter syndrome. When we have these incredibly high standards for ourselves, it can be very, very difficult for any of us to measure up to those. And when it's an industry, that particularly has life or death consequences, which we know it does, that's a lot of pressure for us to put ourselves under. A lot of safety professionals that I speak to, we get this a lot. Everyone kind of feels the need to be the expert. And I think this is really, really backed by the fact that often the route into health and safety is through very high pressure exams, having very, very intense legislation knowledge. I know things have changed a little bit now. There are exam routes where they're open book now, and there are exam routes that are based on experience rather than sort of parroting legislation. But definitely when I first came into the industry 14 years ago, the traditional route was to go through NEBOSH, and NEBOSH at the time was very much was book learning. It appealed to a certain way of thinking. You had to be able to remember every single piece of legislation, parrot it back in the right way, and that makes us feel that that's how we need to be in health and safety, that we need to be someone who knows all this information off the top of our head straight away, and are able to deliver it at a moment's notice. And that is absolutely not the case. Health and safety professionals, the beauty of what we do is that we don't have to know everything. What we need to know is how to access that information and how to work out the right way to do things. But I think that need that we sometimes feel to know everything really, really ties into the feelings of imposter syndrome that we can often have. It's a rapidly evolving field. There is always something to learn. There is always something to learn. There is always something that's changing. We see all these different theories around safety, like, zero harm and all of this sort of stuff. And they change all the time. There's always new theories coming forward. There's always new things to learn. Now, there's a huge thing at the moment with psychological safety, behavioral-based things. There's always something more for us to learn. And again, that kind of makes it very easy for people in the industry to feel like they're not good enough, that there's always something more that they need to know. And to feel like, they aren't this expert that they think they need to be. This one is kind of going away a little bit, I think, in health and safety, but absolutely for a number of years, this has been a thing where health and safety, I think, had this fear of obsolescence, where they fear that they're going to be out of a role because I suppose the beauty of, or not the beauty of, sorry, the point of health and safety sometimes is to do yourself out of a role. You want to make sure everything is perfectly safe and everyone is able to do their job in the best way possible. And sometimes, then that creates this fear that maybe they're not going to need you further down the line. Basically, the whole thing around imposter syndrome is everything is built upon fear and nervousness and this pressure that we put on ourselves. And all of these things absolutely tie into it in a health and safety career. And the isolation thing is not easy either. I think because of the specialism of what we do, a lot of people that we speak to in health and safety, they don't have huge teams. Maybe some of the major big global corporations have big teams of 80, 90 people, but most people that we talk to are either very small teams, 2, 3, 4, or it's just them. It's just them on their own on the site. And that isolation can be really, really anxiety inducing as well, and really contribute to those feelings of imposter syndrome. And I think health and safety is also an industry where there's just a real lack of recognition and appreciation. Not necessarily from inside industry. I think we're very good at patting each other on the back now. There's lots of awards and things that people go for. But outside of the safety industry, there's definitely a lack of recognition and appreciation for what it is that safety professionals do. As much as we're trying to change the perception of what health and safety is, and I've said this before, all you've got to do is open, the Daily Mail or something and see one of their health and safety gone mad headlines to realize that outside of us, people still kind of think with that old school clipboard type. But again, that really, really undermines our self-belief in what we do. So lots and lots of reasons why, if you are a safety professional feeling these feelings of imposter syndrome, there's lots of reasons why that would happen. It's perfectly normal in an industry that's this high pressured, that has this amount of stuff on it. So you are not alone. This is very, very common, I think, is kind of the message I wanted to get across. So you'll want to know how to counter this, right? We all want to know, how do we become these wonderfully competent people that can just throw ourselves into anything and not care what other people think of ourselves and just know that we're great at what we do? Unfortunately, it's not that easy. I wish it was, but a lot of stuff we can do really, really will help. And I think the more that we practice these sorts of tips and these actions, the better we do feel about ourselves. Again, I use myself as a big example here. I definitely have, imposter syndrome quite regularly, and it's something that I have dealt with for years. But I have really embraced a lot of these techniques. That means that when I do get those feelings of imposter syndrome, I can shake them off a little bit quicker. They don't sort of dominate my day. And that's the important thing, is making sure we can shake that off, because the feelings of imposter syndrome aren't necessarily the problem, but the results of what can happen from it, like we said, like the anxiety or the depression or the burnout, that's what we need to avoid. So definitely, if we can try and take on some of these tips, these action points, I think it should help you. So firstly, we really need to accept and normalize those feelings of imposter syndrome. As you can see, I've mentioned this quite a lot already throughout the slides. It is a perfectly normal thing to feel, especially in this industry, such a high pressure industry with life or death consequences. This is perfectly normal. If you feel those feelings creeping up of I'm not good enough, or maybe I don't know enough, just try and accept and normalize those feelings. Say, okay, I understand those feelings are imposter syndrome. I did my Clance IP test. I know that that's something that I feel all the time. Those are not real feelings. They are feelings that everybody gets. So it's kind of like a little mantra to ourselves. And it sounds daft, but it really, really does work. I actually use a couple of techniques that were given to me by a counsellor a few years ago that work really, really well. So one is, when those thoughts do creep up, is I think to myself, would I say those things to my best friend? Is that something that I would say to my best friend about them? Would I say, you're not good enough, or you're not great at that? Or would I talk to a best friend as unkindly as I talk to myself? Absolutely not. There's no way in hell. And actually, if anybody spoke to one of my best friends as unkindly as we sometimes speak to ourselves, that would absolutely not be okay. So that's the first thing that I think. The second one, which is a bit more daft, but I absolutely love, is I gave the feelings a name. So apologies if anyone on here is named Susan, but mine is named Susan. And so what happens is, when those feelings creep up, if you're not good enough, you're not good enough, in my head, I just say, oh, shut up, Susan. That's Susan talking. That's not me. No, it sounds daft, but it's just given to me by a counsellor, and it absolutely works really, really well. That you kind of compartmentalize those thoughts and push them to the side. It's like, Susan, be quiet. That's not true, and push them aside. It takes a lot of practice, but it absolutely works really, really well. So yeah, apologies to any Susans on the call, but try and come up with a name and try and accept, normalize, and push those feelings aside. I think, we went through the stats. Although there's no definitive number of who is dealing with this, like I said, that study from 2020 showed anywhere between 56 to 82% of people. This is hugely, hugely normal. So those feelings are nothing to be scared of. They're very, very normal feelings that a majority of people will feel. Identify and replace those thoughts. So like we said, identify them, realize that those are feelings that come from imposter syndrome, not truth, and then try and replace those thoughts. So what I mean by that is replacing the negative thoughts with positive thoughts about yourself. And how I personally do this is I keep a good old-fashioned list, right? A good old-fashioned list of things that I have done that I'm really, really proud of, that I know are because I deserved them. So it could be a list of awards that you've won, that you worked really, really hard on. You know you deserve that award. So you write that down, you remind yourself of that. It could be a list of recommendations or testimonials that people have given you where other people have said, this, you're really great. So keep those somewhere where you can read them and identify them and think, okay, those feelings aren't true. This is true. Messages of good work. You know, sometimes you might have a message from a colleague or a boss or whoever it is saying, you know, that project that you did, that was really, really great. Keep a little folder of those. I've got a little folder in my inbox of just nice things that people have said or well dones or anything like that I can just go to, and I can look at those and just remind myself that I am good at what I do. You know, it's okay. You do know what you're doing. So that's really, really helpful. Yeah, so focusing on your achievements and successes. Absolutely take the pressure off yourself. You know, like we said, you do not have to be an expert in everything. So there is real power, I think, in admitting what you don't know in a certain situation. You know, safety is an industry with a lot of information. Like we said, it's constantly evolving. There's constantly new things coming out. So admitting an area of weakness is good. You know, there's no shame in it. So that's something I haven't researched yet, or that's something I'm not aware of yet. And I use an example for this quite a lot of myself, my team, everything that we do at Executive Network Group. So we completely changed our management structure probably about 4 or 5 years ago now. And it was because our managers, myself included, we were all under a lot of stress. We were really, really struggling. And what we kind of identified is the fact that we were asking these people to do too much. We were expecting them to be experts in everything. We're expecting our managers to be experts in managing people, but also experts in running a recruitment desk, and also experts in health and safety, and then also experts in business development, and also experts in negotiating terms, and also experts at meeting and networking with clients. It was too much. It was just way too much. You cannot be an expert in everything. So what we did is we stripped that right back. And we created a much more flat sort of management structure where people had different specialities and different strengths. And that really, really helped. So my personal example for this is man management, I really struggle with. Being perfectly honest with you, it's something I really, really struggle with. And I'm a director, so I obviously have a team. And it's something I've struggled with because I think I'm a very type A personality. I'm very quick to do things. I want to get it done and move on. So I struggle when people are, you know, not understanding an issue because I just want to tell them the answer. You know, it just seems I know the answer. They need to know the answer. Why can't I just tell them the answer? And that's not good. That's not good management. Good management is helping people find their own way to the answer. And as much as I knew that, as much as I did coaching lessons and leadership qualifications and all these different things to try and teach me that, it's just not a skill that I'm good at. I just want to tell people the answer. So I took that pressure off myself. I accepted that was a weakness that I had, and accepted the things that I was really good at, which was the going out and talking to people, the networking, the engaging, the business development side. That's the stuff I'm really great at. So I'll focus on that because I know I'm good at that. And the stuff that I'm not so good at, that was giving me that pressure and was stressing me out and probably stressing the team out as well, I'm going to delegate that to someone. There's absolutely no harm in that. So a girl within my team, Ashleen, who a lot of you may know, is fantastic at man management. So we promoted her into a man management position. She's happier, the team's happier, I'm happier. And that really helped. But, you know, for me personally, but we did this with a lot of different teams within Executive Network Group, it helped us all with that imposter syndrome. Because I wasn't expecting myself to be an expert at everything. And then, you know, when I wasn't good at one area, I started doubting everything. At this point, the stuff I knew I wasn't good at, we passed across, and I could focus on the stuff that I am good at. And that really, really reassured me. So I think, yeah, weakness is good. Like I said, there's no shame in admitting the stuff that you don't know. Take the pressure off yourself, particularly in this sort of industry. You know, if you are not necessarily a specialist in coma, then hire someone who is good at coma to look after that bit for you and focus on the stuff you are good at. Take some of that pressure off yourself. So I think that's quite an important point. Never underestimate the value of talking to people. Like we said, this is a huge, huge thing. It's really prevalent. Loads of people feel this way. And when you talk to other people and you have very similar stories and you all share and you realize, oh, actually, okay, this is perfectly normal. Everybody's feeling the same way as I do. That takes so much pressure off. So I would absolutely advise everybody to try and look for some mentors, some support groups. You know, speaking specifically from a women's point of view, there is the Women in Health and Safety group. I did try and look before this to see if there was any, for example, LGBTQIA plus groups in health and safety. I couldn't find any. So my advice here is if you can't find a group, then please be the one that goes out and creates it, because there are people crying out for this. You know, we do quite regular diversity stats, and definitely the industry is getting more and more diverse. So let's make these safe spaces for us all to talk and to share and to share goals and share problems. And that's really, really going to help us. You know, the Women in Safety group is great for that sort of stuff, because you can go along and talk about issues that we've particularly had as women in industry. And usually 9 times out of 10, you're going to find someone else has had the exact same problem. And there's just real solidarity in that. Like, you know, as we said, one of the things at the very start that powers imposter syndrome is that isolation. So let's break that isolation down and get you having some support around you. I know RRSM does a great mentor scheme as well. So mentors, I cannot sing the praises of highly enough. If you can find a mentor who's you know, obviously in the same industry, but potentially also, you know, looks or feels like you in terms of, you know, you're looking for a female mentor because you're a female, or you're looking for an LGBTQ mentor, you know, that stuff, it really, really helps. It's going to give you that solidarity, which will help break down those feelings of imposter syndrome. And so tied into that about the support groups is about building that brand and building that community space. Now, you know, I've talked loads in the past about the power of building a personal brand. In fact, I'm fairly certain I've done a talk on that for RRSM, so I'm sure you can find it in the archives somewhere. But by creating a brand on social media and putting yourself out there, you'll start to create a community, which I think is so important. And you're going to get that external validation and that external feedback on what you're doing. It can be quite scary to do, and I completely get that, because you're putting yourself out there. But again, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get really, really positive things back. In fact, probably more than 9 times out of 10, I don't think I've ever put anything out there that has had a negative reaction. You know, you're always going to find someone who agrees or has something to add to it, or, you know, thinks that that's a great idea. So I would encourage you to look at doing that, building that brand, building that community, start sharing some of the great stuff that you're doing on blogs and things like that, and find other people that think that way. And that's great from that validation perspective. It's something, again, you can put in that little folder of achievements and successes and things that you're really good at, and you can go and look at it when you're having those periods where you are feeling that imposter syndrome, and you can go and look and go, you know what, no, I do know what I'm doing, because I wrote about this and 20 other people all said that that's a great way to do it. So, you know, that is the right approach. So I get it's scary, but that's something I'd really, really encourage you to do. The only thing I will say with the social media aspect of it all, of putting things on LinkedIn and stuff like that, is to avoid comparisons. You know, there's that old saying, comparisons are the thief of joy, and that's absolutely true. You know, what we're looking for is to find your tribe, and to find people that click with you, and that you can bond with, and you can share experiences with. But let's not turn that into, you know, a competition aspect of, okay, well, but they're getting promoted quicker than me, or anything like that. You know, you've got to try and avoid those comparisons. Just focus again on that little achievements folder and the things that you do really, really well. And ask for validation. And it sounds really simple, but so many of us don't do this. We just don't ask. We get in our heads and we get into that little space where we start thinking, I'm not good enough, I don't know what I'm doing. And we don't have a conversation with a colleague or a boss to say, actually, how am I doing? Is this okay? Can we have a review? Can we talk about this? And again, 9 times out of 10, the validation is going to be there. They're going to tell you that you're doing a great job. So there's loads of ways you can look for some of that validation. You can ask for that validation, both internally and externally. You can ask for for reviews. So we do them quite regularly anyway within our company, but our staff can call a meeting with us at any point to talk about how they're doing, and we will always try and give them positive feedback and things, as well as, a couple of little things they can work on, but it's always very, very positive feedback. You can look at awards. Entering awards is a great way to do it. If you put yourself forward for a double RSM award, really, what's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing is you don't win the award. That doesn't mean that your entrance wasn't good at all. It just means that maybe someone submitted a slightly different bit of evidence or whatever it is. But the best thing that can happen is you could submit that, and then you get highly commended, or you get awarded the award, and that's going to give you that validation as well. And then finally, as well, the recommendations thing on LinkedIn, I absolutely love. And we were talking about finding ways to identify those thoughts and then refute them. And this is a great way of doing it. So you don't have to do this on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is just a nice, easy way to keep track of them. But you can go and you can ask people to recommend you. Now, people say, oh, well, I don't have an opportunity to do that because I'm not in recruitment, so I can't ask clients or whatever. I don't just ask people that we've successfully placed candidates with. I ask people, pretty much everyone, to be honest, that I ever interact with. If I speak to you at an event, or I present something at an event for you or anything like that, I will go and ask someone afterwards to give me a recommendation and tell me if it was any good or not. And it sounds a little bit self-serving, because it is a little bit self-serving, and that's okay. That's okay that we want to know that we're good at what we do. And that validation is really, really helpful when you are having those periods of doubt. Again, you can put that in your file of your successes, your achievements, the nice things that people say, and it really, really helps you to turn that mood around. So lots of different things on there that we can have a look at. So key takeaway points for you guys from this. Like I said, we will have time for some Q&A afterwards as well. And of course, you can reach out to me at any point. I'm always happy to chat, but some key takeaways for this. Imposter syndrome is real. It may not be on the DSM, but it is a real thing. There is a research paper out there. It's a very, very real thing. You can even do a test to get a score on it. This is real, and it's really common. It's something that everybody, to an extent, suffers with at some point. You're in very good company, particularly in health and safety. This is an industry where I will say, if you went to an event and you asked, probably 80% of the people in that room are going to tell you they have felt the exact same way as you at one point or another. Don't compare yourself. That's such a big one. Like we said, that comparison is the thief of joy. So focus on what you do well and focus on that side of it, and don't look at what everyone else is doing. That's none of your business, to be honest, what everyone else is doing. The key way to counter imposter syndrome is to focus solely on what it is that you do well, and just keep reminding yourselves of those things. Find that support and that validation internally and externally. So whether that is going out and creating a support group like Women in Safety Group, or whether that's finding a mentor through the RRS scheme, or whether it's building community through brand and finding people that way, asking for recommendations, whatever it is, find that validation internally and externally, and find your community where you can really, really know that you are doing the right things. And yeah, take some deep breaths. You are going to be okay. Tell Susan to shut up and to go away, and it is all going to be fine. I absolutely promise you. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. That was really, I really like the concept. The Susan in your
Susan.
head.
I know. I really hope there's no Susans on the call.
Yeah, I think that was fab. So just a reminder, if anyone has got any questions, just to use the Q&A box along the bottom of your screen. Whilst I'm going through, feel free to pop some more in. So the first one, I think, is the code switching. That's an interesting concept that I actually haven't heard of before. Is it a positive thing or negative? Is it a skill to be able to change the way? Should we see it as a good thing that we're switching the way we speak to people, or should we be able to speak the same to everyone within reason, of course? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a really interesting question, because you can absolutely see both sides of that. The one argument is that you shouldn't have to change the way that you talk to anybody. You know, you should be able to talk to a man, a woman, who, or whatever, you know, whatever situation you're in, you should be able to talk in the exact same way, and you should be respected the same way. Unfortunately, we just know that that's not necessarily true all the time. So I do think it's a skill. It's something that, you know, minority groups are often penalised for, but it's absolutely a skill, being able to adapt to the way that you speak in any particular situation. And it's a skill that often a lot of us don't even know we have. You know, we're talking about it from a gender or a minority perspective, but lots of people have the ability to do this. You know, whether that's your talking to someone who's in a very, very professional position, you probably do talk a bit more formal, and you speak very differently to how you would speak to your friends, where you might, you know, you might make more jokes or you might swear. Most people do this. So I think it's a really, really good skill to have, absolutely. But overall, I suppose, should we have to? Probably not, but unfortunately it's not the world that that we live in. So yeah, I think it's a good skill to have.
The next one is that, see, health and safety for many people in this industry is actually a second career. You know, it's something they do, they move on to it after, you know, specialising somewhere else. And I guess sometimes maybe that the imposter syndrome comes because you feel like you're all comparing yourself to maybe people that have either been in the career their whole life, or, you know, others that have come from various areas. Maybe you're comparing, you know, the comparison is obviously the negative there, but maybe that's where the imposter syndrome comes from. So comparing your experience and your knowledge and feeling like you're perhaps inferior to those that maybe have been in it for their whole career. So what are your thoughts on that sort of thing as well?
Yeah, and it's so completely normal, and again, something that a lot of people will go through. If I think back to the start of my career, right, so I came into HSE recruitment. I had no recruitment experience. I knew nothing about health and safety at all. You know, I was coming in completely fresh, and I came in, and I was, not to blow my own trumpet, but I was very good, and I had a very, very good first year. And we did, at the end of the year, we do sort of an annual conference, and I won a lot of the prizes that first year. And I remember going home and thinking, I didn't deserve that. There's people in this company who've worked here for 10 years. I've literally just come in. They're all going to be hating me. They're all going to be wondering why I've done it. You know, that's a mistake. I shouldn't have won those. So that's a really, really common reason for feeling that sort of imposter syndrome. But again, like I said, those sorts of coping strategies are really, really important. So for me, when I was feeling in that particular instance, I went back and I looked at the statistics, and I looked at, okay, it's not a mistake. These are the statistics. Yes, they've been doing it longer, but my numbers were better. You know, my reviews were better. That's fine. And I think that's why having that little folder of goodness is so important, and something that I still do to this day. I've always got a little folder somewhere where I can call on it and go, what have you done recently that's really good, that you're really proud of, that backs up that you know what you're doing. I think it's just a really, really powerful technique. But yeah, I completely get that, people coming in from different industries. In fact, when I first interviewed for my job at HC Recruitment, I did 5 different interview stages. It was really, really in depth. I had to do presentations on, you know, what I understood about health and safety, and why was it important, and why was recruitment important, and how would I build a strategy around recruitment, and how would I interact with these health and safety people. And again, I had no experience, no idea whatsoever. So I had to go and do loads of research, do all these presentations, got offered the role at the end of the day. And I came home and I said to my husband, I've conned them. Like, there's no way I know what I'm doing. I've sort of absolutely conned them. Why have they given me the job? He said, you haven't conned them. He said, you've done the research and you've given them the answer, and they agree that the answer is correct. You understand it. And it just took that external validation of switching the mindset to get me thinking, oh, okay, yeah, no, that's not a mistake. I did the research, and I do understand it. So that's again why I think those tips are really helpful. If you have the pile of information that you've got of things you've done well, and then you can get that kind of validation from somewhere, whether that is a partner or whether that's a support group, like we said, or a mentor, being able to call up your mentor and say, you know, I got nominated for this award entirely, and I don't think I deserve it. I think I've conned my way into it. There's so many more deserving people, and they'll be able to talk you down off that ledge a little bit. I think it's just so important. So yeah, I definitely encourage everybody to look at the mentor scheme as a minimum off the back of this.
Yeah. So next one. what are some personal strategies or exercises I can use to identify whether I'm experiencing imposter syndrome? And how can I differentiate it from normal self-doubt or the drive for improvement?
Yeah, and it's a really interesting question because it is very similar to normal self-doubt. You know, there's a lot of crossovers between the two. And for me, that's why I really liked that Clance IP scale, because I went through it and I looked at it, I thought, oh, okay, yeah, this is genuinely imposter syndrome. This isn't just me being a bit daft in my head, or you know, this is a real thing. This is imposter syndrome. So that really, really helped for me. But it is a tough one because, like we said, it's not recognizable on the DSM. This isn't something where you can go to the doctor and get a diagnosis of, yes, you have imposter syndrome. So yeah, it's quite tough to differentiate between normal self-doubt and this. I think my answer for that, though, would be that the coping mechanisms are the same for both. You know, whether it's just a little bit of self-doubt or whether it's genuine imposter syndrome where it's crippling, the coping mechanisms are exactly the same. They're going to help you for both of them. That validation, internal and external, that building of building of achievements and successes that you can draw on, the shut up Susan or whoever you want to name her, strategies, that sort of thing, and the talking about it. Absolutely, the talking about it. You know, I keep harping on the mentoring thing, but it doesn't even have to be a mentor, even if it's a partner or someone in industry that you really, really trust. You know, just having that conversation with them is going to help rationalize those feelings, and make you understand that it is coming from a place of doubt rather than a place of truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
She says, doubting herself, you know.
Yeah. If I can get yourself. Yeah. The next one, can having confidence and still experiencing the imposter syndrome be normal?
Could you repeat that? Sorry, I think I lost you halfway through. So
Yeah. Can having confidence and still experiencing the imposter syndrome be normal?
oh God, yeah, absolutely. I mean, anyone that meets me says I am this most supremely confident person, right? This is the feedback I get all the time. I go to events and everyone says to me, gosh, you're always so smiley, you're always so confident, you just walk up to people, you talk. I'm terrified all the time. I like, honestly, I don't think of myself as that sort of confident person. But yeah, you can be confident and have imposter syndrome. Absolutely. I think probably the more confident you are, actually, the more prevalent it's going to be, because you're going out there, you're saying, I'm great, I'm great, I'm great, or I'm good at this, or this is why you should listen to me, or this is why you should work with me. It's inevitable that sometimes in those high pressure environments, your brain is going to start going, are you sure? Are you sure that's right? So yeah, they're absolutely not not mutually exclusive at all. I think again, if you go and read the paper that Clance Lyons wrote, it's really, really interesting because it was always focused on high performing people. That's where it comes from, and people that you traditionally would look at and you would never think in a million years that they felt it. Michelle Obama did a TED talk on how she feels imposter syndrome. That's someone you would look at and you'd be like, she's so confident. There's no way. And she has come out quite openly and spoken about how it's something she really struggles with. So yeah, definitely not mutually exclusive. But I think that the confidence thing for me was always not a front so much, but it's sort of a thing that I put out into the world to hide hide the nerves and hide the imposter syndrome, and then eventually it takes over and actually you are quite confident. So yeah, they absolutely can exist in the same person. Proof right here.
Thank you. And I think this might be the last question. And it's quite a tough one to finish on. I think we often see imposter syndrome as negative and like harmful. Can it ever be positive?
That's a really interesting question. And do you know what? I'm not sure I know the answer. So, like we said, there's power in admitting when you don't know. I personally, I don't know if I've ever seen it as a positive, but it can definitely be used to drive you a little bit. I always find that one of the best ways for me to counter imposter syndrome is to go out and double my workload, which is probably not great advice for anyone. But I do find the more time I have to sit around and think, the more time I have to get those feelings. So that's often what I do. I use it as a way to drive me. If I'm sitting at home and I'm doing a piece of work and I'm thinking that's terrible, that's no good, it's like you can do better than that. That's just not good enough. Then usually what I do is I'll go into the office, I will surround myself with people, and I will put my head down and I'll work like extra hours until the job is done. So I use it as a motivating tool. I don't know whether that's the best advice personally, but yeah, I suppose that there could be some positives in it. But it's a very good question that I don't know a perfect answer to, being honest.
Yeah, fair enough. And I guess we're not encouraging everybody to go out today and double their
No.
work life. Keep the work-life balance. Yeah, no, that's been really, really useful, and I really hope everybody's found today. So, oh, we've got one more question actually, just
Okay,
come
sure.
in, just as I was about to end. So I will add it. We have got the time. How do you cope with the knockbacks, and does this affect your imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, knockbacks are really, really hard. I think the thing with that is it's so hard to do, but it's to try and separate it from who I am personally. So when you have a knockback, it's really, really common. What people do is you feel it personally. You think that it's a comment on who you are, and it's not. All it means, look, we do recruitment, so we often have 2, 3 people forward for a role, and two of the 3 aren't going to get the offer. That doesn't mean that those 2 people aren't good at all. They're often brilliant. They just weren't quite right in that situation for that particular client. That's absolutely no disrespect to who they are and what they do. They're great professionals. So I always try and think about it in that way. I suppose I've got the benefit there because that's what I do for a living. So I see it quite regularly. But yeah, it's trying to separate it from who you are as a person. I think there's an influencer that I follow, and this is sort of related, but I use this quite a lot, who said she gets told a lot that she's too much. And she's changed that to mean too much for you. That, it's not a comment on who she is personally. It's just, it wasn't quite right in that situation for that person. So that's the way I try and see those knockbacks or the rejections. It's, okay, it's disappointing, but it doesn't diminish who I am as a person. It doesn't diminish my worth. It just, I just wasn't the right person at that particular time for that particular client or company or opportunity or whatever it was. And that's a skill. It takes a while, I think, to learn that. But again, it's just that sort of mantra of, this is a normal feeling. It's okay. It's not a personal thing, and just trying to keep reminding yourself of that.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And yeah, I think